Welcome back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And today, we've got some exciting news today. We've got some things that have been happening in the background. We've been working through for a little bit of time here. But today, we are announcing whatever that noise is.
It's like a duck or something. I
was like, is that coming from the fireplace? I'm sorry. We got an important announcement, and that was super distracting. But we're talking about sort of changing some internal structure at Berg Construction.
Yes. It's really interesting because it's been going on for a while. So like for the three of us, it's not as interesting, but I think it's just time to publicly announce it. It's funny. It's actually probably been in place for give or take a year. But Dan is assuming the role of president of Berg Construction. And, I was thinking back on this a little bit, like guys have been with us like Joe for the whole time from when we used to meet in the mornings at 6:30, 7 a.m. And we'd literally direct people to where they were going for that day till now and having a different structure. It's been a lot of change, and the reality is that change is inevitable, and that's the only way we grow. And so, to the team, this probably won't be much of an effect because, Dan's been kind of running the day-to-day for quite a bit for us, but the reality is this is for the outside, as much as it is for the inside team, just so that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, and adds sort of that
Changing
layer
the guard.
of transparency, right? Like, hey, here's what's happening internally. Figured out some of the inner workings of what it means and what it looks like, and now it's time to acknowledge it. So
yeah. It was exciting when I realized when Ford officially, unofficially made the change and said this is the direction we're going to go. I think what I struggled with the most was realizing what the job actually was, right? Like, and Brian and I talked about this a bunch. Ford and I talked about it a little. That the realization that I would have to be the one that sort of comes up with the plan was a big change. Like of all the things, as Ford said, I've been running day to day for a little while, and felt like I manage Berg Construction. I run whatever you want to title those responsibilities. But once Ford made the change last year to me and said in Berg normal fashion, we didn't 100% know what that meant. We just meant there was going to be this title change and a responsibility change, and I had to figure out what that meant. But as I started to really figure out what it meant, I realized it meant I had to have the plan. Whereas before I was kind of bringing forward a solution and saying, what do you want to do? And then I'd say, okay, this can be a good solution. I'll do this. I had to get to a point over the last 9 months or so to be able to say okay, Ford, here is the plan. Here's where we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. Do you agree with this? And that's a big change for me over the last year. That since we made the change, that I was starting to take control. So it's exciting. I mean, it's been a journey for me. It's been a decade more. And I always go back, like Ford said, when I got here, I don't know how many employees there were, but there was not many, 6 to 10 maybe. Mm-hmm. And I remember what the jobs were. I remember. I remember a lot of different things, and just the change in Berg Construction of what we've become is just kind of amazing to look at. And probably the best example of that is scope of work. Like if you would have laid out the plans for a Longwood or one of the big landfills that we've done, or the Griffiths house that we're doing right now, to us years ago, I think Ford might have in 2011 might have said yeah, we can do this Griffiths house. I think Ford would have been comfortable with that job. Probably a little bit uneasy just based on the scale. You think, Ford, of how big that would have been?
Yeah, as you were saying, I was just laughing because there probably would have been a lot of things we like. Actually, it's the other direction now. Like now we're much more thoughtful. Then it was here's an opportunity in front of us. We're going to take it and figure it out later.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And we have no plan. We will get this done. Good luck.
Well, and that goes back to SECRA, right? When we won SECRA, and we didn't even really know what we had won. We weren't even sure really how to do it. You know what I mean? We've talked about it, that we had 20-something people on SECRA. We didn't have 20 employees, so figure that out. But just if you would have said at that point that we'd be able to do the things that we're doing now, to be able to have the team that we have, it's been a big change and an amazing amount of growth. And I mean, I'm excited for the growth and the opportunity, but I also, I take it seriously that Ford's trusting me with managing this thing that he built.
Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
the other part is that this was recommendation from the board to do this, and we do it with all the different things we're involved in, to have somebody doesn't mean I'm exiting stage left, but it also means that the plan, the P&L, all that stuff now is your responsibility, right? I mean, a lot of the stuff that is now your responsibility doesn't really change the field of what we do. It's just a lot more of the internal stuff, a lot more of the things behind the scenes that get involved in it that before, was in a different format than it is currently. Yeah,
exactly. Like the interesting thing about a shift like this is 85-90% of the folks inside of Burke Construction will not perceive it any differently. Yep. Right. Like it just, for them, it's almost unimpactful, just because of how the interactions will still continue to work the same way, how your leadership will still be involved in their roles. And for you, it's different because of some of the managerial components, the leadership components, structurally, that you'll take responsibility for now that you hadn't had in the past. Yep. So, yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, for you, I think there's a really funny, but Berg part of this story. But I don't, Ford, are you comfortable talking about when we were at the peer group? Are you?
Yes.
Right. It was,
the look on your face was pretty good.
So we do the peer group thing, and we think it's really valuable. And we were at the peer group. Were you at the peer group when this happened? You weren't. This was one that he couldn't be at.
Yeah.
And so
this we're last August.
Last August or something.
When I was
you taking
I was taking Aiden to school.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So you couldn't be there.
Yeah.
So Ford and I are there, and we're and it's the very beginning of the peer group, and we go around, and there's a couple new people, because not new people. There are a couple people that owners brought with them that weren't there previously. So Herb Sargent says, let's go around the room just to introduce ourselves, just because, even though we know who we are. And so I said, okay. He said, Dan, you start. I said, fine. I'm, Dan, CEO of Berg Construction. Ford says, you're the president. And I was like, what? And it played out right in front of this group of 14 people, where I realized that Ford had made me the president. And then he said, it was on your review. And I said, my review, you walked in, we had a 5-minute review. You talked to me about what it is I needed to do and what you expected and what you wanted. And I signed the thing, and you walked over and you gave it to Tracy, and he said, and it said president on it. And I was like, what? I didn't look at it.
4 months after it
right. This is months after I had done it. And the guys think it's a joke. They think we're making this up. Ford and I are having a skit just to have fun, but we're not. And meanwhile, I'm texting Tracy, and I'm like, Tracy, does my file say that I'm the president? And she was like, yes, you signed it months ago. I was like, was I the only one that didn't know? And I think I called you later, and I was like, did you know? And I think you didn't know.
No. And because there was no
because there was no
formality.
There was no formality to it, but also to your point, it was that the change outwardly was not really relevant. Right. And the peer group's relevance was we needed to make a statement at some point. And Ford and I talked about it with you, and we said, when the time is right, we'll say it. But until then, we're just going to continue to operate as per normal and allow me to grow into the responsibilities internally that are different. But it was so Berg, it was so, and I don't mean Berg the company, I mean so Berg in terms of the family, the core values that built it. Because it didn't matter. Ultimately, it changed nothing in terms of how we operate.
We're not real big on titles. I mean, the reality is we're big on accountability and responsibility.
Yeah, autonomy.
But by and large, and this has been true as long as I've been a part of Berg Construction and Ford Berg companies. But the reality of it is each one of us has had some modicum of success or culture fit or whatever you want to call it here, because we're all sort of functionally the same. See responsibility, we take ownership of it, we get things done. And that's didn't matter, right? It didn't matter that your title was COO, your title is now president. You still were taking leadership and ownership of the role and the responsibilities you were given. And so that's why it was interesting to watch it play out, because like the title is important from establishing like chain of command, right? Structure. But beyond that, it really has not, in my opinion, changed substantially, like the way you interact with your team, the organization.
It hasn't. I mean, I think the place that it has honestly impacted the most is you and I as a relationship, because as Ford said, like P&L and everything else, like I've had to involve myself more in that. And not that I wouldn't have known the numbers before, but I would have known the numbers because you and Ford talked about it. And we probably had a meeting where I was involved, but ultimately you and Ford went over stuff, and then Ford and I would meet and talk about it. And with Ford making this change, it became that you and I were going to talk about it. And then one of us or both of us would talk to Ford. But it was more of in a reporting method for me than I was the one reporting to Ford what the number said, even though he probably already knew I was responsible. And so I found myself numerous times, like I'll call you and say like, hey, can you get me this information? I don't like asking, but I need it because I'm trying to look at these things. And it was probably the most uncomfortable part of the change for me, was to have to ask you for some of the things that I had always viewed as your responsibility, and saying to you, like, I'm not trying to take the responsibility. It's just like you said about being a culture fit. Mm-hmm. If it's my responsibility, I need to know the information so that I can make sense of it. Even though at times it's like taking 2 steps back, because I'm taking information that you've already probably made sense of what it means to you. Then I'm taking it and trying to like internalize it, make sense of it, and come up with a plan that in the old days would have been a plan that happened, but it happened between the three of us. And most of the mechanics of it would have probably occurred between you and Ford and me and Ford and I and you and Ford. And then we would have gotten together as a group with some direction from Ford. But with Ford wanting me to give the direction, I needed the information. And so that was probably the most uncomfortable part, honestly, is having to step into your world and say, hey, Brian, I need this information so I can make sense of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's been interesting too, because, we've been collecting data for years through HCSS, through different venues, right? But the interesting thing now is that there's a little different tie to it. We upgraded our systems. We went from having our air gap in our systems and not having the air gap anymore, some of that kind of stuff, working through those details. And, me having daily instant access to most of the data, to not having that, but also just to the fact that like now we're tying it back to some of the stuff, because now some of the operational people have some other numbers that before they didn't really have to get involved with. And so there was always like kind of like 2 running parallel systems. And, the 3 of us were kind of where that stuff merged. And now it's kind of a little different operation. So it's been interesting to see people apply it back against equipment or apply it against things that before, like we had all this data, but we weren't really using it in a functional manner to make ourselves better. And now we're trying, like, we'll try something, it might work or might not, but we're trying different things to try and help a better understand some of the data versus just having reams of data and not having the ability to make it all as functional as we had hoped it to be.
You know what else too is this isn't, I think the bigger story in this isn't really about me. I think the bigger story is the impact it then has, because in changing a little bit of the top end responsibilities of me having to try and walk in Ford's shoes and try and be a little bit more of the person planning out ahead and giving us a little bit of direction in where we're going, I had to delegate some more of the responsibility. And again, very similar to the change with Ford making me president, the responsibility that I put on Brad and Scott and Dylan was not inherently more or different, but it was more autonomous. So it was more to say like, hey, whereas before we would have talked about this, now I need you to look at this and you have to give me the solution. You have to tell me this information. And Brian really helped me, actually. He had given me a sheet a while ago about kick-ass meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And
Construction Genius.
And I like looked at it, and it was one of those things like, yeah, when I have time for that, right? And we just don't make time. And so as I really started to get into what the mechanics of this would be, what would I want it to run like? What are the problems I had that maybe I could fix or delegate better and have someone do better than I did them? And so I focused in on that kick-ass meetings and how that was going to work and what it meant to me. And in the last, month or two, I've really seen it be effective with Brad and Scott and Dylan being able to own their piece because I'm out of their way. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, it's actually, I think, helping them. I don't know that they have more authority. Like, I don't know that it was really a change for them. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it a lot like how we talked about me, that it did not materially change their responsibilities, but I think they might be more empowered now to be able to make the decisions, because I've said, like, this is your job to make the decision. Like, what do you want to do? How are we going to do this? How do we accomplish this? What's the best way?
Mm-hmm.
And that came to my mind when Ford was talking about the numbers, you know, because it's one of the things with Brad. Brad is forcing or encouraging, empowering, like whatever word you want to use, us to deliver information more effectively and more accurately in a way that you've been asking me to do it for probably 5 years. You know, but it was always like, Brian, when I will have time, I will do that, but I don't have time right now. But when I said it to Brad, it was like, I delivered your message. Like, this has to be done. It's gone undone long enough. I can't run the company if I don't have this information, which is really ironic because I asked you and Ford to run the company without the information. But I realized the error and tried to correct it. And empowering them, I think, has yielded that all of a sudden, you know, like we closed the month in the time frame that you always wanted to close the month. Like, we're delivering you the information sets, the data set, as well as like the solution from that data set more quickly in a way that you can make it useful, use it, and we can be more intentional. And I think what that's going to play out like over the next year could be really interesting, because you know, we're going to be able to use the data that we have, that we've always just collected and sort of used maybe, you know, but ultimately fallen victim to probably Ford and I's best/worst quality, which is making decisions from our gut based on what we think from a data set that may be more limited than it needs to be, you know. And I think the team now is taking advantage of all the data we have and trying to look at that and make decisions based on larger data sets, which has to be better.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's exciting. And it feels like a change, and yet it feels like it's the same, which is
it's
sort
good.
of like an interesting paradox, because, you know, it deserves to be acknowledged. It deserves to be celebrated. I hope it's exciting for you and your family.
Yeah.
But it also is like, well, this is who we are.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, and you know, we just talk it out live right here, right? Like, that's what this podcast in my mind is always supposed to be, is I have to walk a really fine line of, I always say I'm just a Jersey kid hiding in Lancaster County, right? Like, I have to walk a really fine line of Dan's the president and Ford works for Berg Construction, right? Like, if you ask Ford what he does, Ford would say, I work for Berg Construction. Like, that's what he would always say. We'd be at meetings and Ford would say, they'd say, and what do you do? I work at Berg Construction. That's completely true, right? He would have never said, like, I own Berg Construction. I am Berg Construction. I'm the president, whatever, any number of titles he had over the year. He never would have said it.
Yeah.
Right? He would have said, I work for Berg Construction. So it's an odd line that I'm feeling like I have to walk, because this has to remain the company that Ford built. And so that means I have to act in a certain way, but structurally we want to say, like, Dan's the president. So it's an interesting line to walk, to say, like, I'm the president, but also maintain the same feeling that, like, I just work here. Like, this is not, you know, like I said, I could go away for a while and things would be okay. You know what I mean? Like, Dylan and Brad and Scott would do what they have to do. Your team would do what they have to do. But if one of our crews shows up, the job shuts down, period. Like, work ends that day. So, you know, I think you got to be really mindful of that you can have all kinds of titles and accomplishments, and it doesn't mean a thing if the guys don't show up. If the people don't show up and work, we're dead in the water. So it's an interesting line to walk as I start to, you know, try and walk in Ford in a big shadow. Because, I mean,
I'm trying to lose weight. What are you talking about?
in a slightly diminished shadow that casts a long way.
The sun's really low.
Yeah, the sun's really low.
Well, and that's interesting perspective, but I got a feeling that like, it's something that you probably need to worry about less than you think, just because you wouldn't be in the role if Ford didn't already trust you to do it the way he thought you'd do it. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
He said something, you know, and maybe this is the last thing I'll say. He said to me, and we've made a lot of changes, right? Like, and now the only thing that might make a little more sense to the team now is you look over the changes of the last 9 months, right? And it's us taking a hard look at who we are and who we were, and trying to get back to who we were and try and find the thing that made that made us really successful, and identify that and go do those things. And what's funny is he said to me at one point, he said two things. One time he said, I can't believe that you're really going to run Berg in a way that is so numbers driven, right? Because it was so not how he and I did it. Even though Ford, nobody knows numbers like Ford. And you know that better than anybody. Like when he calls you with a question, he probably already knows every answer that he's going to ask you, but he wants to see what the answer is, make sure it's right, and get your opinion. But that I was making decisions that way, which was uncommon for me. But then he said, you're remaking it in to the vision of what you think it's supposed to be. And I didn't know if it was a compliment or not. You know what I mean? It wasn't an insult, and I didn't take it that way. But I was like, well, no, wait a minute. I'm trying to remake it in the vision of what you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But I think I realized over time that it's a compliment. And he's saying I'm trying to build this thing in the vision of what Ford saw.
Yeah.
But so that ultimately becomes probably the biggest pressure of the role, is trying to continue something in the vision of what Ford had built.
Yeah. Well, I think the good part about that is Ford's going to be right next to you.
He's right there. He's right there.
We got,
sitting on the same sinking couch.
Not even 6 degrees of separation here.
No, he's right next to me. I can hold his hand, but that's probably inappropriate.
So
you know what, Ford? We moved further apart, though.
Yeah.
I know.
You could fit 2 center consoles here. Normally, there was only 1 center console between, and we're backwards. Unless we're in Europe or something. I got to be over there.
And there's
so
no
I can
steering
drive.
wheel. That's the other problem. So usually in trucks.
Other than that, that's the.
But I mean, I think that is part of it, is that,
yeah.
I've had to learn a long time ago, is, you guys have seen how I've had to transition and do different things as my role has changed. But no two people will do anything the same. And so, having the core values, having that stuff, those are the guardrails. But within those guardrails, there is still the ability for people to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing, nobody's going to do it exactly. Each human's different. So there is no exact path. As long as it stays within the guide rails, then there is room to play. Then, and we have always allowed those guide rails to have maybe more space than some places do. We'd like it to be a 6-lane highway, not like a 2-lane highway. So there's more space in there to allow for some different perspectives for some different things that maybe some other places are. But, that is the reality, is that everybody, everything that we're involved in, they do it a little differently. There is no one centralized, there's a same targets and the same goals, but how we get there, everybody has their own paths to getting there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's probably a fair place to wrap it up, I think. So, Dan, congratulations.
Congratulations. You can go
Formally,
update your
now.
LinkedIn profile.
I got to update my LinkedIn profile.
Oh, yeah. That's like step 1, right?
No, step one was just try and run the company. That was step 1.
Let's figure
Well,
this
it
out.
was like a trial run, right? I had 9 months to figure out if I could do this or
That's
not.
perfect. That's perfect. So, hit the ground running.
Yeah.
That's a good place to wrap it up. Thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you got something from this, and we hope you come back for another episode.